Flash versus Jaedong, the Sox versus Yankees of StarCraft Brood War. This is the best and most famous rivalry in StarCraft history. Flash, the ultimate weapon, on the right, and Jaedong, the tyrant, was there on the left. VenomousStare with another Venomous Classic, a classic throwback StarCraft game. And this one is special, folks, because Flash is back. The ultimate weapon, God, the best pro gamer ever. He's returning and he's going to be competing in tournaments again. This is a absolutely monumental occurrence. This is a huge deal. He's been playing ladder for a couple months now. If you follow Artosis's channel, he's been casting those games like crazy, just pulling the replays off the internet from Flash's ladder account and just sort of keeping an eye on what Flash is doing in game. But it wasn't until a couple days ago where Flash announced, yeah, I'm actually coming back as a pro gamer. You know, it's one thing to be laddering again off stream. It's another thing to say I'm going to be competing in the ASL and then in parentheses be the heavy favorite every season. The ASL, of course, is like the GSL for Brood War right now, and it's the most important Brood War tournament if you're a Brood War fan, which of course everyone watching this video is. So if we think about right now, the ASL, which is now called the SSL, is the most important and impactful Brood War tournament. If we think about what the most important and impactful StarCraft 2 tournament is, that's obviously the GSL. Now, before the GSL existed, there were obviously Star Leagues in Brood War. There was the MSL and the OSL. This is a round of 8 game from the OSL. This is the 2009 ever OSL, a very famous LAN. Now, in this round of 8, Flash is the only Terran player, and he's facing off against Jaedong, the Tyrant, one of the most famous and decisive Zergs ever, an incredibly talented and handsome player who's highly regarded and basically a Zerg legend. If we think about Jaedong, he completely turns it on or off. He's utterly polarizing. He will cut drones and go all in harder than any other Zerg. He'll do super duper greedy openings. But whenever you think about Jaedong, what always jumps out to you is how much he understands the Zerg dynamic of how the hatchery works in regards to drone production. Remember, in StarCraft, Zerg is very unique in the regard that all the units come out of the hatch, so Zerg players in general want to be making only drones up until they want to be making attacking units, and then they want to be making attacking units. Whereas Terran and Protoss, obviously, their main mining bases make workers, but then they have other buildings for everything else. So if you look at Zerg at its core, really a lot of what it is just trying to make as many drones as possible. And I know that sounds overly simple. Let me rephrase it. It's trying to figure out how to make as many drones as possible and not die. Because if you say, well, that seems really simple, just don't die, like make a bunch of units or defense. Well, the trick is if you make too many units or defense, you fall too far behind to win. That's the very core essence of Zerg. And if we think about corner cutting and how macro works at a high level in Brood War, a lot of what this matchup is, TVZ, which is historically the most popular and well-liked matchup, and when you say StarCraft Brood War in general, this is what people think of, the first thing that jumps to their mind. A lot of this matchup is Zerg just trying to make pure drones and tech up, and then they want to delay their defense for as long as possible, and then as soon as the Terran gets to their base, they want their defense to finish. Why, you might ask? Because remember the impact of having workers early on in the game. Every worker you make early on in the game, the earlier you take or expand, it puts you in a position where it scales out through the mid game and affects your late game as well. We can see Flash here in the bottom left side of Fighting Spirit is taking his expansion. He has a depot blocking his natural choke with a couple other workers preventing his Marines from being dove. If we think about great Zerg players that win tournaments, when you think of those players, oftentimes it's pure defensive macro players, especially in StarCraft 2. If we think about guys like Serral or Idra, these guys who play very, very methodically and defensively. If we think about Brood War, the player Queen, this is a guy who is very, very solid. Soma, very macro-oriented player. A lot of the Zergs, when they run up to your natural like that with a handful of lings, if they're one of the best 5 pro gamers in the world, you see that and you don't think like, okay, he's going to try to dive on the 3 lings like a coin flipping newbie. With Jaedong, he's so decisive and aggressive and such a sicko that you respect that. You pull those workers and you defend those Marines, because Jaedong is the sort of guy who will flip a switch and instantly cut drones and do a big ling all-in off of just a tiny little opening that he sees. Whenever we think about Jaedong, he's inextricably linked with Flash, and Flash returned, and a lot of this video is going to be about Flash's greatness and the fact that Flash returned and the details and implications of that. But this is Flash vs. Jaedong is what we're watching now, as you see the ultimate weapon Flash right there. But what really jumps out to me about this, I mean, note the perfect SimCity even back in 09. You just love to see that as the E-base coming up here. Jaedong Spire also coming up. Jaedong was famous for his Muta Micro and his Spire use, as we see Ling's running in there. He was also known as one of the fastest, most high APM players. But Flash and Jaedong are inextricably linked. They're like Bird and Magic Johnson. These are 2 players who, when you say one, you sort of think of the other one. Now, Flash is the best pro gamer ever, not just in StarCraft, but in any esport. He's better than Faker, he's better than anyone that you can throw at him from League of Legends or Rainbow Six or CS. He's better than Simple. He's simply the GOAT. He is the best ever. If you think about his level of dominance, his absurd win rate, how good he was through a plethora of different metas, Flash, he simply can't be touched in terms of his insane consistency. The run he went on with Random, which no one has even done, like it's so insane that it hasn't even been approached or really attempted by anyone else, and he just made it so deep and did so well with Random and sort of completely changed what people thought was even possible after pretty much perfecting the game and getting bored with it. Flash got so good with StarCraft Brood War, the hardest game ever, the most competitive and skillful multiplayer game ever, that he was like, okay, I've mastered Terran and have essentially beat multiplayer. I'm winning all the ASLs. They literally rigged the map pool against Flash. It's like, okay, I'll play Random. I mean, it's just incredible, man. It's like when Eddie Van Halen picked up the keyboard. Like, we want to see Eddie on guitar, which in this case obviously is Terran. We want to see him, what he's perfect at, what he's best at. His Jaedong's signature mutas come out here. Speaking of what people are best at, Jaedong not only attacking here and microing heavily with mutas, but he snuck in some lings. It's always interesting to watch muta engagements in Brood War, because so much of it is about the pure muta micro. If you don't know, you have them all in a one hotkey with an overlord, and it allows you to stack them up, meaning that essentially they shoot all at once, and it's really hard for your opponent to focus fire the weak one or even see how weak they are. So when it comes to muta micro, being able to stack the mutas up like that allows you to dart in and do damage. And if you had a big clump of mutas, you couldn't do that. They would be able to be focus fired. They wouldn't be able to consistently shoot at once. So when Zergs figured this out, it was a huge deal. Jaedong was a pioneer in showing how much you could do with muta micro. He's not necessarily the guy that made up how to do stacking micro, but he is the guy that showed how powerful it is. Remember, in StarCraft there are innovators, guys who come up with things, and then there are perfectors, guys who take a concept and perfect it with pure mechanics or improve upon an established idea. Jaedong's third in the top left being scouted. This is a core tenet of this matchup where the Zerg player will try to take a third base in the corner. We saw Flash deny the third base, running up there with an SCV leading with Marine Medic behind it earlier. Great play from him. And a lot of this matchup in the mid game is about Zerg hitting power spikes. Zerg is sort of weak and trying to defend. Once they get sunkens, they're a little bit safe. A lot of it depends on how many they make and when, but really that first power spike is after the layer finishes and they choose whether they want to go Lurker or Muta, and then once those Lurkers finish or once the Mutas finish. Because once the Mutas finish, they can go out on the map and do stuff like this, and of course you can threaten to straight up end the game by harassing the main and the natural. Sometimes the Lurkers or the mutas rather, are a means to an end. As we see Flash forking up here and attacking the third base, lurkers are really setting up outside the natural of Flash here. This is a classic Jaedong move. Is like, okay, I was caught a little bit out of position. That's like a signature move now in his EVT's Kappa, is getting caught out of position and off guard by top end Terrans. But counterattack, that's what I was going to say initially, is like, okay, I'm a little bit out of position, whatever, I'll instantly counterattack, but it's Flash, so he was ready. So Jaedong will have to retreat and take that third in the top right. Now, remember, this wasn't a linear thing like, oh, Jaedong made a silly mistake and Flash just walked into him. No, Flash set that up. He checked top right first on purpose, knowing that's what Jaedong wanted to take, denied that, forced Jaedong to take top left, and then hit a perfect timing that he really knew that the defenses were not going to be up there because top left is the most out-of-the-way base. That's why Jaedong wanted to take top right. Jaedong spawned bottom right. It's hardest for Jaedong to defend the cross-position base, especially before he doesn't have Lair and Nidus. Flash knows that. Doing little things like that might seem simple to you guys is part of what makes Flash great. Is some guys will just do like, oh, one really cool move like that a game, as we see Jaedong trying just that, doing a counterattack with Lings and Mutas as Flash was forking out trying to get map control. And a lot of the Lings die, and Jaedong's going to try to run in here with the lurkers, or at least get positioning on the bridge. One of the best things in Brood War is whenever you can get lurkers defending a bridge. Jaedong lost a lot of mutas there. And that's the sort of decisive play that Jaedong would do. Now obviously, like, Flash, his macro was perfect, he had a ton of stuff and was semi-ready for it. Oh, and by the way, he's up at the third base, as we're seeing why they call him God, as he's checking for the other third base. But these moves that Jaedong are doing would just kill a lot of people. A lot of people would have all of their army up at that third base, that the counterattack would deal severe damage. A lot of people would be too far out on the map there. These moves are like, Jaedong is doing like a very polarizing thing that would just kill a lot of people or get him back in the game. But Flash is so perfect that he's hitting every little timing, and he's defending everything too because his macro's perfect and he always has units at home. I remember Dan Ortosis saying that Brood War Terran is really the race of timings, and it was about hitting timings, like upgrade timings and stuff like that. We can see this timing here. Jaedong really has nothing as Flash is going to run forward and macerate him. And again, Jaedong did have lurkers out on the map, and he was trying to keep Flash contained. But Flash here has a seemingly unkillable army, as Jaedong played exceptionally well and is going to have to GG there. So Jaedong will take off his headphones and basically say to himself, well, gee, I don't know what I could have done differently there. But Flash returns, and you love to see it. He's going to be competing competitively, and I mean at tournaments and not just streaming. And part of why he stayed away for so long was this jokish crypto thing, where, remember when everyone was so into crypto and all that nonsense? Well, Flash was shilling a certain cryptocurrency that went belly up. And the Korean fans specifically got really upset about this and sort of felt like they were leading him on. I guess thinking that, like, man, his financial advice must be as solid as his macro advice. I'm going to follow it blindly. And there was this idea that, like, oh, Flash was, like, sort of in on it, when in reality he got duped and was just dumping a ton of money in a stupid, like, crypto coin that was obviously going to go belly up anyway. And people were really upset about this, and he was dealing with his father having a severe car crash, and just the anxiety with, like, the entire community being very upset with him and him losing a ton of money, as we see Jaedong crestfallen there, Flash signing autographs. But it's great to see the best pro gamer ever return. He recorded this video apology, and I was sort of sitting there watching the video apology like, this is it, like, you're still sitting here complaining for, like, the crypto joke, like, dude, like, fucking, okay, let's see some macro games, for God's sake. Like, it is not that big of a deal. Let's move on. As a StarCraft fan, the only thing that you should be thinking about Flash returning is, that's awesome. He's the best ever. He's going to show new builds. He is going to change the meta, and every single game that he plays is a true blessing. If you're someone who's sitting out there thinking, oh, wow, but he lost a bunch of money in crypto, What a jerk. Like, can you believe on his stream when everyone was talking about crypto and shilling NFTs for God's sake, he also was talking about crypto? Yeah, I should never play again. Shut up. This is Flash. As Michael Scott said about Ryan, I don't care if he murdered his entire family. He's like a son to me. This is Flash we're talking about. He's like a god, and I'm glad he's back. Watch the SSL, my boy Rain is cooking. Sub for more.